It has been a heated debate in the Overland community for decades. What is a better car, a diesel or a petrol? Answering that question is not that easy, but in this video you will learn everything you need to know to make an informed decision when buying your own car. Birgit and I own two Overland cars. Both are Land Cruisers. One is a 79 series and that is a petrol car. We have converted it so it has a cabin now on the back. And then we have a 78 series, a Troopy. That is our Australian car and that has a diesel engine. So you can see, I'm really agnostic when it comes to the type of engine. Let's now start and analyze the pros and cons of the different type of engines. We will look at 7 different items. Starting with the fuel costs. Many people say that driving a diesel is cheaper than a petrol car because diesel is the cheaper fuel. That is true, but it's also not true at the same time. It is true for some countries in normal times. Diesel is not always cheaper than petrol. If you look at the global diesel and petrol prices at this point in time, August 2025, diesel is actually $9 more expensive per liter than petrol. In the US, diesel is substantially more expensive than petrol. The same is true for Canada and for Australia. Of course, the current situation is heavily influenced by the multiple global crises we are facing. But if we go back 1 year to a time before the Middle East war started, then we can see that even then diesel was only 5 cents cheaper than petrol on a global level. When we traveled in Argentina in 2024, diesel was more expensive than petrol, and that is still the case today. In the US a year ago, diesel was much more expensive than regular petrol and even mid-quality petrol. Only premium priced petrol was more expensive than diesel. It becomes clear that there is no easy answer to this question. Specifically not if we travel a lot across borders, we take our cars to different continents. Things change all the time in different countries. So there is no straight answer to the question, what is the cheaper fuel? But anyway, there was a slight advantage for diesel a year ago and maybe generally over time. But let's calculate this and see what it really means. If you take a global average diesel price that is 5% cheaper than petrol, and then you assume you compare two similar cars, diesel versus petrol, and you further assume that the diesel car consumes 10 liters per 100 kilometers and the petrol car will consume about 20% more, so 12 liters per 100 kilometers. And then you plan a trip taking you from London to Cape Town, roughly 13,000 kilometers. If you do the calculations for such a trip, which might last 6 months, then you will find out that your monthly fuel bill for a diesel car is only $62 cheaper than for a petrol car. That is not nothing, but it is also not an amount where you should lose sleep over if you can afford such a trip. So looking at the fuel prices, it really depends where you drive, how much you drive. So there's not really an easy decision. It's quite complex. But I have a solution how to solve this complexity issue. And that solution is the total cost of ownership. Yes, diesel fuel in the long term might be slightly cheaper than petrol, but usually if you buy a diesel car and compare it with a similar petrol car, the diesel car usually costs quite a bit more. So the upfront costs for the diesel car are higher, and that has to be recovered over time. I give you 2 examples. If you take the Ford Ranger in the XLT version and you look at it in the German market, the diesel model is about 4,400 euro more expensive than the petrol one. An extreme example is the Hilux single cab, which in South Africa costs a staggering 8,700 euros more in the diesel version than in the petrol version. And that is looking at the cheapest diesel version. So if we do a quick calculations with a 62 per month on the trip from London to Cape Town. With the Hilux bought in South Africa, we could drive 27 times from Cape Town to London, and only then would we have recovered the upfront cost of the Hilux. With the Ranger bought in Germany, it's still 13, 14 times you could drive the distance from London to Cape Town. On top of this, you have to keep in mind that maintenance on modern diesel cars is usually significantly more expensive than on petrol cars. Coming to a conclusion on the cost side, if you take everything into account, there is no real advantage for diesel cars. They might even be slightly disadvantaged if you take everything into account. So on the cost side, I would say there is an even playing field depending on your individual situation. Let's talk about range. Since diesel cars usually consume less liters of fuel per 100 kilometers than petrol, the range you will gain with a full tank of diesel versus a full tank of petrol is slightly higher. That gives you an additional peace of mind and puts the diesel ahead of the petrol car. But how important is that really? A lot of off-road cars have a tank capacity of something like 80 liters. But in reality, if you are driving in remote areas of the world, in reality, you will find a petrol station every 500 kilometers at least. So if a 80-liter diesel tank gives you 800 kilometers of coverage and a little bit less on the petrol car, that is not really a major difference. And you could always carry an extra jerry can with 20 liters of petrol to give you this extra range. Therefore, I think in reality, for most people, the range is not really an important factor. Both of our Land Cruisers, as a standard, came with 180 liters of petrol or diesel capacity. But in reality, we have not really had so far a situation where we needed that kind of range. Even when we traveled for 2 months or nearly 3 months through Argentina, the longest distance between petrol stations was about 550-ish kilometers. And of course, there are some parts in Australia where you need to go further. If you think about the Canning Stock route, where you need to cover at least 1,000 kilometers if you come from the west, of course, there you need this extra range. But to be honest, how many of us are really driving these kind of tracks? And if you really go this kind of distances, then put some jerry cans onto your roof and fill them up into your tank step by step with the tank levels reducing. Therefore, on the range, the diesel has an advantage, but it is for sure not a game changer. There are still the myths out there that in certain areas of the world it would be very difficult to get petrol, much more difficult than diesel. In my opinion, that is simply not true. At least not in normal times. You can experience shortages of either fuel from time to time in certain locations if local refineries are down for maintenance or are being closed, or for government decision reasons. So it can happen for diesel and it can happen for petrol. But in general, the supply for both fuels is plenty. Think of all the motor scooters you can see in Asia and in Africa, even in the most remote areas. They all run on petrol. So there will be fuel. No matter where you go, you will find petrol as well as diesel. So I don't think that this today makes any difference. Did you ever experience difficulties when looking for fuel? Share your experience down in the comments and I will reply to it, I promise. Let's talk about driving capabilities of the two different engine types. There are some distinct differences. Usually, diesel cars have more torque. That means they are better when climbing steep hills or mountains, and they are better in dragging a caravan or a trailer behind your car. And diesel cars also have a slight advantage when descending a steep hill, as the engine braking is more effective than on a petrol car. On the other hand, a petrol engine usually has more power and therefore is much better for driving in sand. On rocky grounds, both are more or less performing the same. Another topic you have to take into consideration is water crossings. If you do a lot of water crossings, with a diesel, it doesn't like any water. Already a very, very small amount can completely destroy your engine. On the petrol side, of course, they also don't like water coming into the engine, but they can cope with a little bit of it. So you can get away if you have the unfortunate situation. That brings us to the ease of repair. I have heard many times from people that they prefer a diesel engine because it's much easier to repair when traveling in remote areas. Mechanics in the remote areas can easily fix any diesel engine, so goes the saying. I would see this a little bit more differentiated. If you have a diesel from the 80s or 90s, then for sure that is true. These engines are simple, they are easy to repair, they are indestructible. If you get one of these, go for it. But this is not true for modern diesel engines, engines that have been introduced beyond 2000. In some cases a little bit later, but let's take this 2000 mark as a benchmark. Due to the sharp tightening of the emission regulations, modern diesel engines are really complex beasts. They contain a lot of technology. Modern diesel engines require a lot of modern tools and software to really repair them. And because they are working under enormous pressure, there's zero tolerance for mistakes. So the famous improvisation skill of people in remote areas does not come to play anymore with modern diesels. Therefore, I think that modern diesel engines do not have an advantage anymore compared to modern petrol engines when it comes to repair. I think it's quite the opposite. I think that diesel engines actually have a disadvantage. So my recommendation is, if you decide to go for a diesel engine and you want to travel into remote areas of the world, then try to find a diesel that has been built in the 80s or the 90s. And with that, we are coming to the last point. And I think there is one point that really, in my personal opinion, kills the modern diesel engine for traveling in remote parts of the world. And that point is fuel quality. And fuel quality has certain elements. In some countries, you will find issues with sediments in the diesel or with water. You can also find this sometimes in petrol. These kind of issues can really be tough on a diesel. Even very fine particles can destroy the pumps and the injectors on a modern diesel. But more or less you can solve this by installing some extra filters. Just make sure you take a few spare filters with you when you go on a long trip. The real issue though is another ingredient, sulfur. Modern diesel engines are designed for very low sulfur content. That is due to regulations. They cannot cope with the sulfur regulation above 50 parts per million. If the sulfur level is higher than that, the control systems will shut down the engine. And this is an issue because many countries in the world still have high sulfur levels in their petrol. On this map, issued by the United Nations, you can see the sulfur level of diesel globally. Green does not mean it is okay. Green means that you have a problem. Only in the countries colored blue is the sulfur level acceptable. And there you see that the US and Canada, as well as Europe and Australia, are all fine. But in Asia, Central America, South America, and in Africa, many countries still sell diesel with a very high sulfur content. You cannot use it for a modern diesel engine. That means driving in these countries can cause you a lot of trouble. The other issue is altitude. When we were in Argentina, we met people that could not drive certain mountain passes in the Andean mountains because their modern diesel would shut down. The maximum altitude they could go was 4,000 meters. And the reason is that in higher altitudes, the combustion efficiency declines, and as a result, there are more particles in the exhaust, and therefore, the control systems see this as a breach of regulation and shut down the engine. And compared to that, with our petrol Land Cruiser, We went up to more than 5,000 meters with our car with no issue at all. And these two things, the sulfur and the high altitude, these two things really roll out for me personally a diesel engine for traveling in remote areas. Let's try to sum up everything we have learned today. You have seen that the decision on what kind of engine to choose for your overland vehicle is not that straightforward. It really depends on your needs. If you, for example, live in Canada and you will only ever take your car around Canada and the United States, a diesel is perfectly fine for you. But so is a petrol car. However, if you want to take your car around the world, if you want to travel to remote areas in Asia, in South America, in Africa, then I personally would strongly recommend to either buy an old diesel car from before the 2000s or to go for a petrol car. So why have we chosen the cars we have chosen? So first of all, our Australian car is a Troopy, a V8 turbo diesel car that has a lot of horsepower and drives very good in sand and is also very safe when overtaking large road trains, which are quite common in Australia. And since we never plan to ship it to a destination outside Australia, we do not see any issue with high altitude, with repairing it, or with the sulfur levels. The V8 diesel engine is perfect for our needs in Australia. The rationale behind our decision about the 79 series, which is based in Europe, is a different one. Because we want to ship, and we have already shipped, this car to several continents, and we want to drive around Africa, we want to drive around South America. There we had to take into consideration things like the sulfur levels and the high altitude and some other things. And therefore, we have come to the conclusion that the petrol engine is a perfect choice for us for the car we have based in Europe. What would be your choice? Please let us know in the comments, and let's see if we can have a nice and productive debate about the right choice of car. I hope this video was informative for you, and if you liked it, then please like and subscribe, and maybe some of our other videos shown up here are of interest for you.